We get that message right at the top, trying to reconnect, please. Anyway, my dears, good evening. Welcome once again to Tales and Cocktails. And tonight we conclude the novel Brat Farrar by Josephine Tey. And first, let me give a tip of the hat to John, Miriam, Frank, Amy, and Charlotte, who each and individually requested that I read this novel. So tonight we conclude, and this is for you. On Friday morning, Simon came bright and cheerful to breakfast. He commented on the process of the trunk murder investigations, the character of Daddy Thacker, whose value had been estimated by the court at 1 halfpenny, and the iniquity of poisoning as a means of ridding oneself of a human encumbrance. Except for an occasional gleam in his eye, he showed no awareness of their changed relationship. He was taking their spiritual twinship for granted. Eleanor, too, seemed to be back on the old footing, although she seemed shy, like someone who had made a social gaffe. She suggested that in the afternoon they should take the 4 silver cups to their engraving. It would be nice to have Patrick Ashby on a cup again, she said. Yes, won't it? Simon said. Simon evidently looked forward to years of baiting his spiritual twin. But when Brat said in answer to B that he had talked late with the rector, Simon's head came up as if he had heard a warning. And after that, Brat caught Simon's glance at him every now and then. Westover in the afternoon, he appeared and insisted on making a third in the bug's scanty space. One of the cups was his own unaided work, he said, and he had a right to say what was to go on it, whether it should be in Roman, Arabic, Hebrew, Greek, or Cyrillic script, or mere shorthand. So powerful was Simon's indifferent charm that even Brat found himself on the verge of wondering whether the rector had been right, and he had built his story out of whole cloth. But he remembered the horse that Farmer Gates had bought his daughter, Peggy, and concluded that that was than anything Simon himself might provide. When they had decided on the lettering for the cups, the names on the cups, Simon and Eleanor went to tea, but Brat said that he had some shopping to do. Brat had decided what he had to do in the present impasse. He could not go to the police with his story in its present form with any more hope of being believed than he had been by the rector. If the rector, who knew Simon's weaknesses, refused to believe without concrete evidence, how much more would the police refuse to believe when Simon to them was not a weak of latchets? Brat therefore proposed to provide them with the evidence. He went down to the harbor and sought at Chandler's, and there, after some consultation and a deal of choosing, bought 200 feet of rope. The rope was so thin that it was not much thicker than stout string, but its breaking point under tension was very much that of steel. He asked them to pack it in a cardboard box and deliver it to the Angel garage, where the bug was. He received it at the garage and packed it away in the baggage compartment. When the others arrived to go home, he was waiting innocently in the car with an evening paper. They had packed themselves into them and said, "Whoa, we've forgotten to leave that old tire with them." And he got out and opened the rear compartment to get the tire. "What is in the box, Nell?" "I didn't put any box there," Eleanor said, not moving. "It can't be for us." "It's mine," Brat said. "What is it?" "Secret. James Fryer and Son, Ship Chandlers," said Simon's voice. Oh, God. There was a label on the box that he had not noticed. Simon shut the luggage compartment with a bang and came back to his seat. "What have you been buying, Brat? One of those ships in a bottle?" "No, it's a little too large in a bottle. One of those full-sailed galleons that sit on suburban sideboards to delight the heart of our island race and comfort it for being sick on the trip to market." "Don't be a fool, Simon. What is it, Brat? Is it really a secret?" If Simon wanted to find out what was in the box, he most certainly would by one method or another. And to make a mystery of it, far better to be apparently frank about it. "If you must know, I'm afraid I'll lose the knack of spinning a rope, so I bought some to practice on." Eleanor was delighted. Brat must show them some spinning that very evening. "No, not until I've tried it out in camera first." "You'll teach me how, won't you?" Yes, he would teach her how to throw a rope. She was going to hate him one day soon if that rope did what it was bought for. Right back at Latchett's, he took the rope out and left it openly in the hall. Bee asked about it and accepted the explanation of its presence, and no one took any more notice of it. He wished that his last short time at Latchett's did not have to be spent in lying. It was odd that, having spent his whole time at Latchett's lying like a Levantine, he should mind so much about this minor, smaller deception. There was still time to do nothing about it, to leave the rope there and not ask it to answer any question. It was the wrong kind of rope for throwing, but he could change it for the right kind. But when night came and he was alone in his room, he knew that he had no choice. Across a world to do, and he was going to do it. The household went early to bed, still tired from their excitements at Burr's, and he gave them till 12:30, and then prospected. There seemed to be no light anywhere. There was certainly no sound. He went downstairs and took the rope from its corner. He unlatched the dining room window, stepped over the sill into the night, and drew it gently down again behind him. He waited for any reaction, but there was none. He made his way softly over the gravel to the grass, sat down in the shelter of the first paddock trees, out of the range of the windows, and without any holes at intervals down the length of rope. It was a pleasant, reassuring thing to feel the familiar touch of rope after so long. It was a well-bred rope and answered sweetly to his demands. He felt grateful to James Fryer and Son. He wound the rope and put the coil of it over his shoulder. In half an hour, the moon would be up. It was a young moon and not much of a lamp, but he had 2 good torches in his pocket, and he did not very much desire a full moon's frankness tonight. Every 5 minutes, he stopped and waited to see if he had been followed. But nothing at all moved in the night, not even a cat. As he came toward the foot of Tan Bitches, and he found the path to Westover without having to flick a torch. He followed it up a little, and then, when he could see the beech crown of the hill against the sky, he struck off it until he reached the thicket on the upper side of the old quarry. There he sat down and waited. But again there was no sound at all in the sleeping countryside, except the sudden cry of a sheep on the hill. He tied the rope round the bowl of the large bear and let it uncoil itself until it fell over the edge of the quarry into the green thickness below. This was the steep side of the quarry. The lower side had had a narrow entrance, but it had long ago fallen together and become overgrown with an impenetrable denseness of briars. Old Abel had told him all about it the day they had sat there and talked of Patrick. Abel knew all about the quarry because he had once rescued a sheep from it. It was much easier to go down the sheer face, Abel said, than in at the lower side. In fact, to go in at the lower side, or any other side, was plumb impossible. No, there was no water in it. At least there wasn't any 20 years ago, which was in fact, the water all drained away under the hill to the sea. Brat tested the rope several times and felt for it fraying, but the bole of the tree was smooth, and where it went over the lip of the quarry, he had padded it. He slid over the edge and felt for his first toe hold. Now that he was level with the ground, he was more aware of the brightness of the sky. He could see the dark shape of the low thicket against it above him. He had found his first foothold in the rope now, but his hands were still on the rope where it lay taut on the turf. "I should hate," said Simon's voice, in its most Simon drawl, "to let you go without an appropriate farewell. I mean, I could just cut the rope and let you think, if you had time to think at all, that it had broken. But that wouldn't be any fun, would it?" Brat could see his bulk against the sky. From the shape of it, he was half. Brat could touch him by putting out a hand. Fool that he had been to underrate Simon. Simon had taken no chances. He hadn't even taken the chance of following him. He had come first and waited. "Cutting the rope won't do much good," he said. "I'll only land in the branches of some tree farther down and yell my head off until someone comes. I know better than that. A personal acquaintance of mine is a relation, one might say." He expelled his breath in a whispered laugh. A sheer drop to the ground, half a hillside away. Brat wondered if he had time to slide down the rope in one swift rush before Simon cut it. The footholds had been for coming up again. He could just ignore them and slide. Would he be near enough the bottom before Simon realized what he had done? Or would it be better? Yes. His hand tightened on the rope, and he pressed on his toehold and lifted himself until he had almost got one knee on the turf again. But Simon must have had his hand on the rope somewhere. "No, you don't," he said, and brought his heel down on Brat's hand. Brat grabbed the foot with his other hand and hung on, his fingers in the opening of the shoe. Simon brought his knife down on Brat's wrist, and Brat yelled, but continued to hang on. He dragged his right hand from under Simon's shoe and caught him round the back of the ankle. He was covering with his body the rope in front of Simon, and as long as he held on, Simon could not turn to cut the rope behind him. It is very upsetting to have one's foot grasped from below when one is standing on the very edge of a precipice. "Let go," said Simon, stabbing frantically. "If you don't stop that." "Let go," Simon said, hitting wildly in blind panic and not listening. Brat removed the hand that was holding onto the edge of the shoe and caught the knife hand as it came down. He now had his right hand round Simon's left ankle, and his left hand was clutching Simon's right wrist. Simon screamed and pulled away, but Brat hung his weight on the wrist. He had the confidence of a toehold, but Simon had nothing to brace himself against that was hanging onto his knife wrist, and Brat, with a great heave, took his right hand from Simon's foot and caught Simon's left hand with it. He had now got Simon by both wrists, and Simon was bent over like a bow above him. "Drop that knife," he said. As he said it, he felt the turf at the quarry edge settle a little and slide forward. It made no difference to him, except to press him out a little from the face of the cliff. But to Simon, already bent over by the weight of Brat's arms and body, it was fatal. Horrified, Brat saw the dark mass come forward. It struck him from his toehold, and he fell down with it into darkness. A great light exploded in his head, and he ceased to know anything. Bee sat in the dingy cafe with a cup of slopped coffee in front of her and read the sign on the other side of the road for the 100th time in the last 48 hours. The sign said, "Motorists, please refrain from using your horn. This is a hospital." It was only 7 o'clock in the morning, but the cafe opened at 6, and there was always at least one other customer having a meal as she sat there. She did not notice them. She just sat with a cup of hospital wall opposite. She was an old inhabitant of the cafe by now. "Better go out and have a meal," they would say kindly, and she would cross the road and sit for a little with a cup of coffee in front of her, and then go back again. Her life had narrowed down to this pendulum existence between the hospital and cafe. She found it difficult to remember a past, and quite impossible to visualize the now, a dreary half-world of gray misery. Last night they had given her a cot in one of the sisters' rooms, and the night before that she had spent in the hospital waiting room. There were 2 phrases that they used to her, and they were as sickeningly familiar as the sign on their wall. "No, no change," they would say, or "better go out and get a meal." The slatternly girl came and pushed a fresh cup of coffee in front of her and took away the one she had. "And you haven't even touched it." The fresh cup was slopped over too. She was grateful to the slatternly girl, but felt outraged by her sympathy. She was enjoying the vicarious drama of her presence in the cafe and its implications. "Motorists, please refrain from you." She must stop reading that thing. Must look at something else. The blue checked pattern of the plastic tablecloth, perhaps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh no, not counting. The door opened and Dr. Spence came in, his red hair tumbled and his chin unshaved. He said, "Coffee," to the girl and slid into the seat beside her. "Well," she said, "still alive." "Conscious?" "No, but there are better indications. I mean of a chance of his regaining consciousness, not necessarily of his living." "I see. We all know about the skull fracture, injuries there may be." "No. You oughtn't to be living on cups of coffee. That's all you've been having, isn't it?" "She hasn't been having even that," said the slatternly girl, putting down his full cup. "She just sits and looks at them." A wave of weary anger rose in her at the slatternly girl's appropriation of her concerns. "Better let me take you downtown and give you a meal." "No, no, thank you. The Angel is only a mile away, and you can rest properly there." No, I can't go as far away as that. I'll drink this cup. It's nice." And knocked down his coffee and paid for it. He hesitated a moment as if reluctant to leave her. "I have to go back to Claire now. You know I shouldn't leave him if he wasn't in good hands, don't you? They'll do more for him than I ever could." "You've done wonders for all of us," she said. "I shall never forget it." Now that she had begun drinking the coffee, she went on drinking it and did not look up when the door opened again. It would not be another message from the hospital already, and nothing had from the hospital. She was surprised when George Peck sat down beside her. "Spence told me I should find you here." "George," she said, "what are you doing in Westover at this hour of the morning?" "I have come to bring you comfort that Simon is dead." "Comfort?" "Yes." He took something from an envelope and laid it in front of her on the table. It was weather-worn but recognizable. It was a slender black stylograph with the decoration consisting of a thin yellow spiral. She looked at it a long time without touching it, then looked up at the rector. Then they had found, yes, it was there. Do you want to talk about it here? Wouldn't you prefer to go back to the hospital? What difference does it make? They're both just places where one waits. Coffee? Said the slatternly girl, appearing at George's shoulder. No, thank you. Radio! What is there? I mean, what is left? What did they find? Just bones, my dear. A skeleton under 3 feet of leaf cloth. And his pen? That was separate, he said carefully. You mean it had been thrown down after? Not necessarily, but probably. I see. I don't know whether you will find it comforting or not. I think it is. But the police surgeon is of the opinion that he was not alive, or perhaps it would be more accurate to say not conscious, when he was thrown over, B said for him. Yes, the nature of the skull injury, I understand, leads him to that conclusion. Yes, I am glad, of course. He probably was quite happy on a summer afternoon. There were some small objects in the cloth, things that he probably had in his trousers pockets, but the police have kept these. Colonel Smollett gave me this. He picked up the stylograph and put it back in its envelope and asked me to show it you so that you might identify it. What news from the hospital? Spence was driving away when I saw him. None. He is not conscious. I blame myself greatly for that, you know, the rector said, standing. He would not have been driven to this sub rosa proceeding, to that crazy nighttime search. George, we must do something to find out who he is. But I understand that the orphanage, I know they made the usual inquiries, but I don't suppose they were very persistent ones. We could do much better, surely. Starting from the presupposition that he has Ashby blood in him? Yes, I can't believe that a resemblance like that could exist without it. The coincidence would be too great. Very well, my dear. Do you want it put in hand now? Yes, especially now. Time may be precious. I'll speak to Colonel Smollett about it. He'll know how to go about it. I talked to him about the inquest, and he thinks it may be possible. Nancy told me to ask you if you would like her to come into Westover to be with you, or if it would only worry you to have someone around. Dear Nan, say it is easier alone, will you? But thank her. Tell her to stand by Eleanor, rather. It must be dreadful for Nell, having to toil with unimportant things in the stables. I think it must be a soothing thing to have to devote one world. Did you break the news to her, as you promised? The news that Brat was not Patrick? Yes. I dreaded it, Bee. I confess frankly, you had given me one of the hardest tasks of my life. She was still fresh from the shock of knowing that Simon had been killed. I dreaded it. But the event was surprising. What did she do? She kissed me. The door opened, and a probationer, flushed and young and pretty, and looking at her lilac print and spreading white linen like a visitor from another world, stood in the dim opening. She saw Bee and came over to her. Are you Miss Ashby, please? Yes, said Bee. Oh, that's nice. Your nephew is conscious now, but he doesn't recognize anyone or where he is. He just keeps talking about someone called Bee, and we thought it might be you. So Sister sent me across to see if I could find you. I'm sorry to interrupt you, and you haven't finished your coffee, have you? But you see, yes, said Bee, already at the door. He may be quieter, you see, if you were there, the probationer said, following her out. They often are when someone they know is there, even if they don't actually recognize them. It's funny. It's as if they could see them. They'll say Eileen, or whoever it is, and Eileen says yes, and then they're quiet for a bit. But if anyone else says yes, 9 times out of 10, they're not fooled at all and get restless and fractious. It's very strange. What really was strange was to hear that steady stream of words from the lips of the normally silent Brat. For a day and a night and a day again, she sat by his bed and listened to that restless torrent of talk. Bee, he would say, just as the little probationer had recounted it to her, and she would say, yes, I'm here. And he would go back reassured to whatever world he was wandering in. His most consistent belief was that this was the time he had broken his leg. He was torn with anxiety about it. I'll be able to ride again, won't I? There's nothing really wrong with my leg, is there? They won't take it off, will they? No, she would say, everything is all right. And once, when he was quieter, are you very angry with me, Bee? No, I'm not angry with you. Go to sleep. The world went on outside the hospital. Ships arrived in Southampton water. Inquests were held. Bodies were consigned to the earth. But for Bee, the world had narrowed to the room where Brat was. On Wednesday morning, Charles Ashby arrived at the hospital, padding lightly down the polished corridors on his large, noiseless feet. Bee went down to receive him and took him up to Brat's room. He had hugged her as he used to when she was a little girl, and she felt warm and comforted. Dear Uncle Charles, I'm so glad you were 15 years younger than Father, or you wouldn't be here to be a comfort to us all. The great point in being 15 years younger than your brother is that you don't have to wear his cast-offs, Charles said, pausing outside Brat's room. So you'll be very quiet, won't you? Charles took one look at the young face with the slack jaw, the blue shadows under the closed eyes, and the gray haze of stubble, and said, Walter. His name is Brat. I know. I wasn't addressing him. I was merely pointing out the resemblance to Walter. That is exactly what Walter used to look like. Bee came nearer and looked. Walter's son? Undoubtedly. I don't see any resemblance somehow. He doesn't look like anyone but himself now. You never saw Walter sleeping it off. He looked at the boy a little longer. A better face than Walter's, though. A good face. He followed her into the corridor. I hear you all liked him. We loved him, she said. Well, it's all very sad, very sad. Someone in America. Yes, so George Peck told me. But who would that be? Who went to America from Clare? The Willett family went to Canada, and they had daughters. It was a woman, you know. Perhaps they finished up in the States. If it was a woman, I'll eat my hat. I feel that way too. Do you? Good girl. You're an admirably intelligent woman, Bee. What are we going to do about the boy? For the future, I mean. We don't know yet if he has a future, she said. Only the rector, Bee, Charles, Eleanor, and the firm of Cossett, Thring and Noble knew so far that Brat was not Patrick Ashby. And the police. The police, that is, at what is known as the highest level. The police have been told everything. and they were now engaged in their own admirable fashion in smoothing out the mess to the best of their ability without breaking any of the laws which they were engaged to uphold. Simon Ashby was dead. It was to no one's advantage to uncover the story of his crime. By a process of not saying too much, the ritual of unwanted truths still buried, a harrow dragging over earth that held below its surface unexploded bombs. The coroner sat on the poor bones found in the quarry and adjourned the inquest sine die. No one in the neighborhood had ever been reported missing. Townbitches, on the other hand, was a favorite camping ground for gypsies who were not given to reporting accidents to the police. Nothing remained of the clothing but a few scraps of unrecognizable cloth. The objects found in the vicinity of the bones were unidentifiable. They consisted of a corroded piece of metal, that corroded piece still recognizable as a knife, and several coins of small denominations. "George," said B, "what became of the pen? The stylograph? I lost it." "George!" "Someone had to lose it, my dear. Colonel Smollett couldn't. He's a soldier with a soldier's sense of duty. The police couldn't. They have their self-respect and their duty to the public to consider. But my conscience is between me and my God." I think they were touchingly grateful to me in their tacit way. The adjourned inquest on Simon Ashby came later, since it had been postponed until Brat was capable of being interviewed in hospital. The policeman who had interviewed him reported that Mr. Ashby could remember nothing about the with his brother at that hour to climb down into the quarry. He had an idea that it was the result of a bet. Something about whether there was water in the old quarry or not, he thought, but he could not take his oath on it, since his recollection was vague. He did know he had serious head injuries and was still very ill. He did know, however, that he had found out from Abel Tusk that there was no water there, and Simon probably had said that the contest may have arisen. Abel Tusk corroborated the fact that Patrick Ashby had asked him about water in the quarry, and that it was an unusual thing to find the floor of an old quarry dry. It was Abel Tusk who had given the first alarm of the accident. He had been out on the hill with his sheep and had heard what he took to be cries for help from the direction of the quarry, and had gone there as fast as he could and found the undamaged rope, and had gone down to the blacksmith's and used his telephone to call the police. B, replying to the coroner, agreed that she would most certainly have taken steps to put an end to any such plan had she heard about it. And the coroner expressed his opinion that it was for that reason that the thing had been done sub rosa. The verdict was death by misadventure, his sympathy with the family on the loss of this high-spirited young man. So the problem of Simon was settled. Simon, who, before he was 14, had killed his brother, calmly written a note on that brother's behalf, tossed the pen into the abyss after his brother's body, and gone home calmly to 6 o'clock supper when he was chased out of the smithy, who had joined the night search for his brother on his pony and sent his brother's coat to the cliff top and left it there with the note in the pocket, who is now to be mourned by the countryside as a high-spirited young man of memorable charm. The problem of Brat remained. Not the problem of who he was, but of the problem of his future. The doctors had decided that, having against all probability lived so long, he was likely to go on living. He would need long care, however, and a peaceful life if he was to recover properly. Uncle Charles came to see you one day when you were ill, Bea said to him when he was well enough to keep his attention on a subject. He was astonished. My cousin. Yes, said Brat. He was not interested. What did it matter now? We began inquiries about you. The police did that, he said wearily, years ago. Yes, but they had very little to come and go on. Only that a young girl had arrived by train with a baby and gone away by train without one. The train had come from the crowded Birmingham district with all its ramifications. We started at the other end, Walter's end. We went back to where Walter was, somewhere about 22 years ago, and began from there. Stone, so it wasn't easy. But we did find out that, among his other jobs, he was in charge of a stable in Gloucestershire for a couple of months while the owner was away having an operation. The household was a housekeeper and a young girl who cooked. She was a very good cook, but her real ambition was to be a hospital nurse. The housekeeper liked her, and so did the owner, and when they found she was going to have a baby, they let her stay on, and she had her baby in the local maternity home. The housekeeper always believed that it was Walter's child. She did not want to get married. She wanted to be a nurse. She said that she was taking the baby home for the christening. She came from Evesham way, and she didn't come back. But the housekeeper had a letter from her long afterward, thanking her for her goodness and telling her that the girl had realized her ambition and was a nurse. No one knows about my baby, she said, but I have seen that he is well looked after. She glanced at Brat. He was lying with his eyes on the ceiling, but he appeared to be listening. Her name was Mary Woodward. She was killed during the war, taking patients out of a ward to safety in a shelter. There was a long silence. I seem to have inherited my cooking talents too, he said, and she could not tell whether the words were bitter or not. I was very fond of Walter. He was a dear, very kind. He had only one fault. He had no head for drink, and he liked drink very much. I don't believe for a moment that Walter knew about the girl. I think she didn't want him to know. She had another look at Brat. Perhaps she had told him all this too soon, before he was strong enough to be interested, but she had hoped that it would give him an interest in life. I'm afraid that is as near as we can get, Brat, but none of us have any doubt about it. Charles took one look at you and said, Walter. And I think myself, you look a little like your mother. That is Mary Woodward. It was taken in her second year at St. Luke's. She gave him the photograph and left it with him. I'm going to leave you. I've taken a lease of Tim Connell's stud at Kilbarty. Oh, Bea! Not immediately, but when Brat is able to travel. You're taking Brat there? Oh, yes, of course you must go. Oh, that is a wonderful idea, Bea. It solves such a lot of problems, doesn't it? But can you afford it? Shall I lend you money for it? No, Uncle Charles is doing that. Lovely to think of Charles supporting horses, isn't it? You'll need all you have to pay death duty, my dear. Mr. Sandal has broken it to the bank that the place belonged to Simon all the time. What shall we do about letting people know about Brat? I mean about his not being paid to do anything about it. The facts will inevitably ooze. They always do. I think we just do nothing to prevent the leak. The fact that we're making him part of the family instead of starting prosecutions and things will take a lot of the fun out of it for the scandal mongers. We'll survive, Nell, and so will he. Of course we will. And the first time someone mentions it boldly to me, I shall say, my cousin? Yes, he did pretend to be my brother. He is very like Patrick, isn't he? As if we were discussing cream cakes. She paused a moment and then added, but I should like the news to get round before I am too old to marry him. Are you thinking of it? Bea said. Bea hesitated, then decided to let the future take care of itself. Don't worry. It will get round, she said. Now that Uncle Charles is here and is going to settle down at Latches, she said later to Brat, I can go back to having a life of my own somewhere else. His eyes came away from the ceiling and watched her. There's a place in Ulster I have my eye on. Tim Connell's place at Kilbarty. She saw his fingers begin to play with the sheet unhappily. Are you going away to Ulster then? He asked. And run the stable for me. The easy tears of the newly convalescent rose in his eyes and ran down his cheek. Oh, Bea, he said. I take it that means that my offer is accepted, she said. And that is Brat Farrar by Josephine Tey. And again, my thanks to the people who requested that I read it, because I have loved reading it. I hope we haven't had a lot of interruptions. That sign has been reappearing. But in any event, that is it for tonight for Tales and Cocktails. And I will see you, I hope I will see you next week at the same time. Whew. Yeah, I think next week it's going to be P.G. Wodehouse. And then, this is sort of fair warning, because we have passed the of Tales and Cocktails, I may take a small hiatus, only for the live performances. There'll be reposting of some of the previous ones, but we'll see. I'll let you know next week. So that's it for tonight, my dears. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for being here for Tales and Cocktails. And sleep well. Enjoy the evening and then sleep well. All right. Good night.